Dogs in the park, dogs in the yard, dogs at the beach, dogs in restaurants? It's possible. State lawmakers are considering bills that would give restaurants the option of allowing dogs on site under certain conditions. It's a move fully supported by the Hawaiian Humane Society. State health officials have concerns, however. What do you think? Join the conversation about pet-friendly policies in restaurants. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise. Dogs are described as man's best friend. The origin of that phrase is up for debate. Articles online mention a statement by King Frederick of Prussia as far back as 1798 and a documented court case in Missouri about 90 years later. And science indicates a relationship has existed between humans and dogs going back centuries. The bottom line, dogs are popular, but popular enough to be allowed in restaurants? That question is now before the legislature. To talk about the pros and cons of this, we will hear tonight from the director of the State Department of Health, an advocate from the Hawaiian Humane Society, and representatives from two restaurants, one who supports the legislation and the other who has some reservations. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and on the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guests. Stephanie Kendrick has been a public policy advocate for the Hawaiian Humane Society since 2016. Prior to that, she was a journalist for 25 years. Bruce Anderson is the director of the Hawaii State Department of Health. He has more than 30 years of experience managing health and environmental protection programs here in Hawaii. Sandy Livingston is the marketing director at Hula's Bar and Lay Stand. Hula's supports the legislation. And Robert Bach is the owner of Giovanni's Pastrami, CJ's New York Style Deli, and Round Table Pizza in Waikiki. He has some reservations about the legislation. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Stephanie, I want to start with you. Why is this a good idea?
Well, Yanji, we think it's a good idea for a number of reasons. Hawaiian Humane Society's main interest in the legislation is that it supports the human-animal bond and creates a more pet-friendly community. And we've advocated for our 135-year history for better laws for animals and protections for animals and people. And in order to change the laws, you first have to change attitudes. And so we see this as one more step toward changing the attitude of pets as family members and not, furry alarm systems or accessories or things that belong at home. They really should be part of our daily lives, integrated into our daily lives, and we see this as one more step in that effort.
On the other side, Bruce, where do you stand on this? What's the department's concerns?
We love dogs too, but there's a place for them. I have 3 dogs, and we take them on walks. We are with them as much as we can be, but I would never take them to a restaurant. They are potentially vectors of disease that we're concerned about. We don't have a lot of disease associated with dogs, and certainly not dogs in restaurants. Of course, they're not allowed now, except for service dogs and dogs used by the police for enforcement purposes. But our feeling is that's not one of the places you want to have dogs. They are associated with some problems I'll discuss a little later, and we certainly don't want to have a situation where the restaurant owner or the manager is making decisions on where dogs should be, which is what this bill calls for. Some restaurant owners have good discretion, some don't, and there are public health problems associated with having dogs in food preparation areas, food service areas, and of course wait staff and others potentially carrying disease-causing organisms from one place to another associated with those dogs.
Sandy, tell me, why would Hula support this? How do you think this would enhance the customer experience?
Well, that's a good question. We have a lot of customers who actually come to us and ask if they can bring their dogs in. We're located in the Waikiki Grand, so it's a condo situation, so there's a lot of people who live there, and a lot of people have their dogs. And so they come down, they're always taking them on walks, they're like, can we come to Hula's? And most of the time we have to turn them away unless there's some kind of weird, crazy circumstance. But yeah, it would really allow us to be able to bring those people in and create a situation where people are able to be a community and like play with other people's dogs, meet other dogs, you know, have fun and just enjoy an experience that is more diverse.
Okay. I know you own 3 restaurants, so you'd have to make 3 calls on this. How would you know, what are your reservations on this? How would you navigate this as a business owner?
I have to start by saying I'm a dog lover. I don't know if anybody's more of a dog lover than I am. I've had a dog for 72 of my 76 years. I just lost Moose, my 11-year-old Labradoodle, 75-pound Labradoodle, November 13th. He was my best buddy. He was with me every morning from when I woke up through the night. I have an office in my home where he was with me, and every day I would go to my restaurants for 3 or 4 hours, but I wouldn't take my dog. I wear 2 hats. I'm a dog lover and I'm a restaurateur. I see issues in the restaurant. I have reservations. I'm not against this bill. I believe the bill has to be tweaked, and it has to apply to both ends. You have to look at one issue other than health is bites and fights. You want to avoid that. We have people at our restaurant that bring service dogs in. Somebody brings a dog in that wants to attack a service dog, there's a problem with the service dog and with the service dog's caregiver. Then you have the health reasons. I mean, you know, I've had people sneak their dogs in. We've had this happen from time to time. I had a customer once bring a dog in a case, and I said, put it on the floor. They put it on the booth. The next thing I knew, the dog was sitting on their lap with his paws on the table and getting fed. It's an issue. That person is touching the dog's mouth, touching the ketchup bottle, the salt, the pepper, and I'm not aware of what foodborne illnesses could be transmitted. I'm not aware of how often that dog is vaccinated, whether he's getting its monthly flea pill, his monthly heartworm medication, when he's vetted. So it is an issue. And then there are people in the restaurant that are, I'd like to think that everybody's a dog lover, but everybody isn't. They may just be very uncomfortable being around dogs. I walk my dog around the neighborhood every day without a leash. He greeted everybody, but there were people that stay away. They're afraid of dogs. Maybe they were bit. We have to protect them as well, and we don't want to lose customers. But I think there are answers to this. I think it has to do with what the bill talks about what locations you'll make available for the dog, how they'll get there, and I don't want to take up the whole discussion.
Well,
but,
to that end, let's talk about the specifics of the bill. We have a few graphics to share with you tonight that talk about the responsibility of the dog owners and of the restaurants. The conditions for the restaurant patrons are the dog shall remain within the patron's seating area or on the floor. And on the floor, rather. The dog shall not obstruct any pathways, interfere with activities, or enter the food preparation area. Continuing with that, the dog cannot disturb or interact with other patrons or dogs except by invitation. The dog needs to be housebroken, and if it does relieve itself in the restaurant, the patron is responsible for cleaning up after the dog. Continuing on, the patron cannot leave the dog unattended at any time. The responsibilities of the restaurant owners require food service employees who touch the dogs to wash their hands as required by the law and post signs that dogs are allowed with certain conditions. So, you know, Stephanie, listening to what Robert raised here, what are your answers to some of those reservations? Yeah,
and we really have tried to, in working on the bill, and we have been in contact with Hawaii Restaurant Association and some other interested parties in the process of putting this language together, and really wanted to make responsible pet ownership a part of this conversation. And, you know, everyone wants to see this law, when it passes, be a net positive for the community. You know, we don't want the situation where there are fights. We don't want the situation where people are putting their dogs on the table and making others uncomfortable. So we were careful to try and address some of the safety and sanitation issues and really make it clear that if you want to take advantage of a business that is saying, I'm going to open my doors to you, then you need to do that in a responsible way. Your animal needs to be trained and socialized to be behaved in that environment. And we think that's a really important part of the bill.
We've got plenty of you calling in, and we encourage you to continue to do so. We already have a number of questions. Rhonda brings up a point, to that point of socialization that you were talking about earlier. She says, I'm for pet-friendly dining as it provides socialization for dogs, which is needed here. I prefer not to dine anywhere near children, but I don't think we should ban children from restaurants. So, Bruce, how is this different?
Well, you talk a little bit about the problems with dogs, and again, these are problems that are associated with dogs generally, not necessarily dogs in restaurants, but they do carry salmonella, staph infections. There are some more exotic diseases, including leptospirosis, that they do carry and can shed in their urine. And of course, they have fleas and ticks, and we haven't talked about it much, but there are people who are allergic to hair and other things that dogs are associated with. Robert mentioned, most animals are clean, but you never know where a dog's been rolling recently, and they do often roll. I have 3 dogs. They all have very different personalities: a golden retriever, a Westie, and a red and white setter. Imagine my bringing all 3 of those dogs, but they all are very different. The golden retriever will greet everyone in the restaurant and probably be patted. They're almost irresistible. And Westie will probably sit under the table, and the red and white setter will be running around like crazy, so it's hard to know what your dog's going to do, and all dogs are very different. And although we like to think that homeowners or dog owners are going to be responsible, the truth is they're not always. And then what do you do? Is a restaurant going to have a dog bouncer? Or what are you going to do when a dog starts misbehaving? Certainly if you call the health department on our sanitation branch, we're not going to be able to respond in a timely manner. So I think there are some issues there that need to be considered. But getting back to the public health problems, there are diseases that can be transmitted. We don't have a good record of those. They're mostly common diseases, and you're not going to be able to point to a restaurant as being a source, even if dogs were allowed, for most of the cases we would expect to see. But there is a risk associated with it, and as all other decisions, you're weighing the risks against the benefits. And in this case, across the country, the organizations that are involved have determined that the risks associated with disease transmission offset the benefits, except for the service animals and so forth. So our food laws are really based on what's recommended nationally, and that is basically that no pets be allowed in restaurants for public health reasons primarily. And
on the other hand, just to address the point of precedent a little bit, the FDA obviously takes that position, but there is a study that was done of places that had localities that had pet-friendly policies, and they couldn't find any reports of actual ill effects from health for allowing dogs in restaurants. So theoretically, sure, there are things that dogs carry that could infect people, but in the places where these sorts of laws exist now, there haven't been any news reports of major health outbreaks or safety issues with dogs fighting. And the one study that tried to compile information really found that as long as the sanitation guidelines that apply in restaurants anyway are followed, that should be sufficient to take care of any threat. So, we could worry about the theory of what could go wrong all day long, and probably none of us would eat out if we thought about that too much. But there just isn't any evidence that this has actually been a problem in places that have pet-friendly policies for dogs in restaurants.
Yeah, I was going to say the whole thing of risk versus stepping out and doing something new. I mean, we have to make this assessment for everything we do. And at some point, we made kind of an arbitrary decision of what we were going to do with these pets, what we were going to do with these animals. And it wasn't really based on a society like we are today. Today, we've evolved. We've made our dogs, they're no longer, we don't own them anymore. We're parents to them. We're guardians for them. It's a different type of relationship that even we had 30 years ago with our pets. And so we're entering a situation where we can't look at laws from the 1970s, 1980s, because there were different types of societies back then. We have a different one today, and we have to approach it that way. So all of these risks, I mean, we're going to have all of these risks from humans as well. I mean, how many diseases are we catching from our fellow humans? How many diseases can we catch just going to a restaurant without any dogs? There is this whole, it seems like an arbitrary line.
There's a question from a viewer that says, is it possible to limit the law to allow only small dogs in restaurant? I mean, Robert, what about this idea that Bruce brought up that, like, would you have a dog bouncer? I mean, as a restaurant owner, how would you set the parameters for what kind of dogs are allowed? And does that dog, you know, if there's an incident that happens, is that dog banned from your restaurant? Like, how would you actually, on a practical level, make this good for people who like dogs and those who don't, and could all eat together?
Yes, a dog bouncer is not the answer. And the size of the dog is not the answer. But now I'm picturing a big St. Bernard wanting to come into my restaurant and eat. I think the answer is compromise. I mean, it may be too early in the program to acquiesce a little bit, but I have reservations. I'm not opposed to it. I'm a dog lover, and I like the idea of dog-friendly restaurants. And 9 states have done this, I believe, successfully, because I tried to check. I even saw online where law firms were advertising under the category of dog seating in restaurants, and I called a law firm in Utah to find out how many cases you have. I got nothing. But
How the lawyers can't even
if you
find
look,
it.
but if you look at what they're doing, I mean, this bill, I believe, has to really be tweaked. California is a great example. Florida started in 2012, California in 2014. Dogs can accompany their masters and stay with them in a restaurant in a separate area that must be outdoors. And that outdoors area must not be enclosed, otherwise it's considered part of the restaurant. And there must be a separate entrance for dogs to go in so they don't walk through the restaurant. Now we've eliminated a lot of these problems. We still have the same health issues outside that we would have inside, but we've eliminated the contact with people that don't want to be around dogs. We have eliminated the contact with service dogs that can be anywhere.
I mean, what you're suggesting is sort of akin to a smoking section, you know, back in the day when we had smoking in restaurants.
If I'm not mistaken, that's what the 9 states that have permitted this all do, and they do it successfully. And
Stephanie, can you speak to that? I mean, how do they do this in other states?
Actually, you're absolutely right. All of the states that have passed these laws so far do restrict them to outdoors only. The reason that we haven't been that specific and instead have deferred to the restaurant owner to decide which areas are going to permit pet dogs and which aren't is because, strangely, given our beautiful year-round climate, Hawaii has very few restaurants that have outdoor seating, and many of the restaurants we're hearing from who want to participate don't have outdoor seating, and they feel that they know their operations, they know their workflow, they know their traffic patterns, and that they should be able to decide this area is okay for pets and this area is okay for people who don't want to be around the pets. And we just think that they
Stephanie,
should have that
outdoors
discretion.
is there for another reason, though. It's easy access to walk your dog outside. There has to be an entrance there. You can't walk your dog through a restaurant to get to an outside patio in any of these states. You have to enter from the outside to that outside seating.
If we talk about the risk a little bit more on that issue, obviously you don't want your dog in a kitchen, right, where you're preparing food. You probably wouldn't want a dog around the areas where you're making a salad or preparing food for service. But there is a possibility that, we would be willing to consider some accommodation to some of the dog owners outside of a restaurant. I mean, there are lots of places. I can think of Starbucks around here and food courts and other places where there is no food service, there's no food preparation. You're taking a cup of coffee outside, or you're maybe a sandwich that you bought inside and eating it outside. The risk would be far less in a situation like that than allowing dogs in restaurants. Unfortunately, this bill allows dogs anywhere, and it's up to the restaurant owner to decide where the dogs would be allowed, and that's really...
Just to clarify, it isn't any dining area. We're not suggesting dogs should be in the kitchen.
Well, the bill doesn't even clarify that. It actually refers to food for service establishments, and that's the entire establishment. But that's the kind of thing I think we need to look at. Should dogs be allowed in enclosed areas? I personally don't think that's appropriate because of the food service issues, people handling food, serving food, and frankly, I worked in restaurants as a busboy and waiter for years, and I can tell you I did not wash my hands every time I touched something. And I would find a dog irresistible, to be candid with you. So let me just say that there is a possibility that we could come to some compromise on this and allow for some dogs on the grounds of restaurants, say outside, if the area where they're preparing foods could be enclosed and separated. I think that's how they deal with the cat cafes and so forth. They actually allow people to engage with cats, but they don't serve food in those areas, nor do they prepare it. This bill doesn't go there. It really allows the discretion of the owner as to where they should allow the dogs, and that's completely unacceptable to us. The bill should be very, or the rule that we develop, we think should be very specific on where the allowance would be so that we can better manage the risks associated with that.
Well, in the graphics that we did present, it did say that the dogs cannot be in a food preparation area, just that the dog can be in the restaurant. But I can see that you think that there could be some gray area there.
Oh, definitely.
There's the logistics too of the dog in the restaurant. You think about tables that have a space for people to enter their own tables and their booths, and the servers to serve them, and the bussers to clean. Now you have a dog that must be lying next to your table, in front of your table, not always under. There isn't room. You can't put a dog on a booth. You can't put a dog on a chair. Outdoors, you have more flexibility if you have that space to create that space for the dog to have its freedom and the table to be served as well. So.
I think one of the things that we're not talking about with this bill that's very important is the fact that this doesn't require every restaurant to comply and allow dogs into it. This is based on choice. The restaurant owners have the choice. If they have the facilities to be able to do it, they have the freedom to make that choice to be able to allow those dogs in. And that is something that is very important to discuss when we're talking about this bill. It's not going to require every restaurant to do it. We're not going to, a small restaurant that maybe has like plastic tables that could move around easily if maybe a leash got caught on it, they probably would not want to do something like this. I'm not speaking for them, but probably not. The thing is, this is about choice. This gives us the ability to set up our own system and allow those dogs in.
Well, we have a number of people writing in about allergies. So what about people who are afraid of or allergic to dogs? Don't they have rights? So in a restaurant like yours, would you have a dog section? Like if this actually passes, how would you implement it?
I'm actually allergic to dogs. And so this is something that I have grappled with myself. And I don't know, as long as I am not touching the dog and the dog is not licking me in any way, I'm fine. And I mean, my best friends have dogs and I play with them. I have to wash my hands after I'm finished, but it hasn't caused any problems.
Jenny from Kihei writing in says, I feel that restaurants would see a huge increase in revenue and customers if dogs could go in restaurants. When I lived in San Diego, I would only select restaurants that would allow for dogs. They had a social scene that connected to the community through their dogs. I mean, Robert, do you think that this would actually help your business in any way?
It might. I mean, I think that's good for dog lovers like myself. You know, I'm a dog lover. I would like to take my dog to a restaurant but again, I'm concerned. I got to wear both hats with the health laws and the safety. And as an owner or patron, possibly my concession would be if they had an outside area that would work. But I can't see it working in a restaurant at all. I could see total chaos. And I think we all have to listen to the 9 states that have enacted dog-friendly laws for restaurants, and not one of them is permitting their dogs to eat inside the restaurant, where this bill calls for the owner or management to pick an area. And you know, this ties into liability too. When something happens, this bill says that the dog owner will be liable. Come on, you get bit, your dog gets bit, who do you sue? The restaurant with insurance and the owner, or the person that owned the dog?
Well, on that question, I actually was curious, whose insurance would cover that? In that, would that be your insurance?
It would be the restaurant's insurance,
and
sure.
Does your insurance actually cover something like that?
I don't believe it does. We have liability insurance, and I doubt it. We have to comply with the laws of the state of Hawaii, and the laws of the state say no animals in our restaurant other than service dogs or police dogs. So right now the answer would be no. I believe it's a state of Florida, and I don't know what other states required restaurants that did allow pets to have sufficient liability insurance to cover it, which they probably have anyway. But I wouldn't be covered now because I'd be breaking the law by letting a dog in, and if that dog bit somebody, why would they cover me?
How, we now do have quite a number of service animals in restaurants. So we, not to the extent that this bill would allow, but obviously this is starting to happen already where you have an animal in a restaurant. Have you heard of any incidents where there's been any issues around that? I mean, does that give us a window into what would come if this passed?
I don't want to confuse service animals and pet animals because they're two really separate issues. The only place where you can maybe make the argument that service animals demonstrate that this wouldn't necessarily be a problem is the allergy thing, because service animals are going to have the same dander that any other dog would have. But in every other respect, they really are two different animals, if you'll pardon the pun. Service animals are highly trained, they're performing a function. And their ability to access public spaces is tied to the disability of their owner. They're there to do a job. So I don't want to confuse the issue of where pets should be allowed and where service animals should be allowed. In fact, one of the things that we do in this bill is we make it clear that one of the things that we think could be a benefit of having restaurants where pets are actually welcome is hopefully to cut down on the issue that a lot of businesses are seeing, and I'll let Sandy and Robert speak to it, but with fake service animals and people who are masquerading their pets as service animals. And as the Hawaiian Humane Society, we don't want to see that behavior. We want people to be responsible about what their animals are and what their capabilities are, and we don't want to do anything that's going to conflict with the needs of disabled people to have their service animals performing the functions that they need them for.
If I could disagree with Steph a little bit on this point, they are connected. In fact, the argument I hear from the individual service animals that they don't want other dogs in the restaurant because of the risk of the dogs getting in fights. Their dog may be perfectly well trained, and most of them are. Service animals I've seen are extraordinarily well trained. That's not true of a lot of other dogs. And the risk they have is that their dogs will get in a fight with another dog in the restaurant, and that's what they're concerned about. And their safety would be jeopardized in that case. So these are clearly tied issues, and I respectfully would say that you're going to probably find a lot of opposition from people with service animals. Everyone I know of service animals is opposed to this measure for that very reason.
I was going to say, but Hula's, a lot of the people with service animals are actually excited about it.
We've heard that as well.
Yeah.
But I don't want to speak
We
for
all
them,
agree with
so.
that. I think that's, you don't know the situation that the service dog is required for, and there are two people. There are two bodies at stake there: the service dog and the person the service dog is protecting. So I can't blame them to not want to take that risk to be around a dog who just may not be that well trained, who could attack them.
Is this already happening? I mean, are people already bringing dogs to restaurants?
Yeah, let's face it. And across the world, you're seeing a trend along these lines. The U.S. is actually way behind Europe in some respects. If you go to Paris, I hear there are restaurants where it's rare not to see dogs in the restaurant. So there's a trend in that direction, certainly. And I'm not sure how to explain it, except that people, as pointed out earlier, are thinking of their animals as family and don't want to be around them, don't want to leave them. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of people out there who go to a restaurant and they don't want to be sitting next to some stranger's dog. They're going out to enjoy a meal, a conversation with their friends, or whatever the case may be. And a dog, much less not their dog, is going to be distraction at the very least for their enjoyment of the restaurant. So it'll be interesting to see how people fall out on that issue. Certainly, I think dog owners would be much more likely to want to be with their dog in a restaurant than someone who isn't associated with that dog.
Well, that's the thing. This bill gives the owners the choice. So if they do have customers, and say the majority of their customers, they don't like the fact that the dogs are in there, they can amend their policy and change to something else. But it gives them the freedom to be able to do that.
I would say that goes without saying. I mean, I couldn't imagine a law that would require restaurants
Exactly,
to
but that's the
dogs.
point. It doesn't.
But that's,
How many restaurant owners have you heard from? I mean, how many people do you think would actually adopt this into their restaurants? How many dog-friendly restaurants would we have in Hawaii?
As a dog lover and as an advocate for a pet-friendly community, I'd love to say all of them, but I think it probably will be a minority, particularly at first. And the restaurants obviously are going to have a lot to figure out in terms of what their policies are going to be, because the bill makes it clear that they can establish rules over and above what the bill establishes as a baseline. How is it going to to work? Is it really what their customers want? And so I think there would be a feeling out period. I would love it to be something that grows as restaurants have good experiences and their customers have good experiences, but I don't have a guess in terms of a number to start with.
Let me say, I think there are places already that are accommodating this to some extent, legally or not. I live up in Manoa, and you know, I go by places, I won't name them, but they have outdoor eating areas, and it's not uncommon to see people after they're walking their dog or during their walks to stop and have a cup of coffee, and it doesn't seem to bother too many people. Usually it's just one dog. I would wonder if there were 3 or 4 dogs, whether that would be continuing to be the situation. But you know, and as it is, there are places where I think that's going on now, and that isn't necessarily a problem as it is. I do worry, and let me add, those are all outdoor eating areas, well removed from the food service and prep areas where the public health risks are obvious. So I would think that maybe there's some accommodation again in places like that where dogs could be controlled and not pose a nuisance to other patrons in the restaurant.
And on that point, we have quite a few people saying, isn't it cruel for a dog to be sitting in a restaurant and smelling all that food? That's an interesting point. You might have.
My setter would agree with that point.
The caller says when he sees a dog in a restaurant, he goes elsewhere. He thinks dog owners should take their dogs to the park, not the restaurant. They are not hygienic. This is Dan in Ka'ava. And another person writing in saying, when dog owners no longer leave dog waste on our sidewalks, parks, and private property, then it will be time to consider sharing restaurant and tables with dogs. I mean, that there is a point there that you need to be a responsible pet owner.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
100%.
And not all pet owners are responsible. You have to admit that too.
I think,
But this is part of trying to change the culture.
Exactly.
And that's
But-
what we're
Yes.
talking
but
about.
you know, it's all coming together because, like you said, you don't have to do it. Now, one of my restaurants, I can't do it. I have no outdoor seating. So in a way, I'm discriminated against if my next door neighbor can do it. But I'm willing to.
If the bill passes.
Well, if the bill passes,
Well,
you can.
no,
I was going to say, we don't have outdoor seating either.
I'm totally opposed to inside. I think there's too many issues and too much risk for dogs inside a restaurant. But I am all in favor if you have outside seating.
So what's the reservation on the inside? Because this bill does allow for inside.
I don't think it can work. I think it's unfair to the customers that don't like dogs, that are uncomfortable with dogs, that are afraid of dogs. I think it's unfair to the customers that
I was
have
going to say,
service
that's your
dogs.
choice.
Well, this is again
Exactly.
where
Yes, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
no, that's right. But, okay, so yes, you're right on that. You're right, I have a choice.
And I'm not going to tell you which ones because the health department director is sitting right here, but there are restaurants on Oahu now that are letting people in with their dogs into indoor dining areas, and they wouldn't be doing it if it was causing them problems.
All right,
I will
so then
say
it's a
this, I mean,
choice.
as a patron, whenever I see the restaurant welcoming a dog, like we've been to a few places where they're allowing them to go outside, like you said, and whenever I see that restaurant embracing that dog and like bringing in a bowl of water and being kind, I want to patron that restaurant more. There's a restaurant by the museum that did
What, a
that.
bowl
Now I
of
go there
water?
for lunch, like a lot.
You said a bowl of water.
Yeah, because he was
we
sitting
haven't
next
e-
to
We
us.
haven't even talked about that.
Well, that was
would
just an example.
No, but I'm saying that customer that doesn't know better, come on, at home, what I do with my dog, I'll let it take. My kids say, how can you do that? Put a piece of meat in my mouth, turkey, let the dog. That's in my home. Okay, not in my restaurant. All right. What do we know? I'll ask Bruce. I mean, what do we know about that customer that sets down their plate next to their table so the dog can finish off whatever, the eggs, the bacon, or even a bowl of water? I could see styrofoam or paper cups for water outside, not inside, because it's going to get splashed on. It's going to be on the floor. I mean, the whole inside thing, that's one issue, but the whole inside thing to me doesn't work because of the risks with a dog. If a dog happens to urinate, defecate, vomit, leave
and the
saliva
way-
outside that can be hosed off and cleaned up and still sanitized, There's a difference. This bill, if the dog does that inside the restaurant, this bill calls for the owner to clean it up. What, does the owner know what sanitizer to have and they have it with them? I mean, that's got to be the responsibility of the restaurant. So again, it boils down to the restaurant doesn't have to do this, but I think it's a difficult task to put on a restaurant to let all animals other than service dogs in their restaurant. Outside, I'm aware,
dogs.
not animals,
Yeah.
I mean dogs.
Yeah.
But I'm very much in favor of outside, that's my compromise, outside seating for dogs at your restaurant.
Yep.
I can do that at 2 of my restaurants at the Hilton Hawaiian Village, yet the Hilton Hawaiian Village is not a dog-friendly hotel. So then I would have another issue. But if the Hilton opened up, I'm all in favor, and it does happen, and it has happened.
Well, what about that issue, though, of the dog, using the bathroom, which might happen? The onus is on the dog owner.
They don't use the bathroom. That's a problem. They go to the bathroom.
Right, exactly. What do you think about what he's saying about the sanitation there?
Sure, and obviously there are provisions in the bill that that's not supposed to happen in the restaurant. And restaurants, I mean, part of the sanitation protocol that the Department of Health has has to deal with cleaning up human messes. I mean, people also throw up and not typically pee in the middle of the restaurant, but maybe in some of our more lively bars. But I guess the point is, if you're talking simply about germs, that's what the whole sanitation branch and the health department rules are there for, is to deal with cleaning up germs in restaurants. And really, and Bruce has the medical background, so I'll defer to him, but everything I've read about dog germs versus human germs is we're a lot more at risk with each other than we are with dogs. So I think if a restaurant can deal with all of the pathogens that human beings are carrying around, they can probably deal with the pathogens that dogs are carrying around.
Absolutely.
What's your take on that?
And then again, it gets down to what risk do you want to accept and not accept. People do throw up, and there are risks. And you're right. There are probably more concerns about human person-to-person transmission than animal-to-human transmission. But having said that, that the restaurant staff are going to get involved with cleaning up a dog's mess, whether it's urine or feces or whatever it is. There's no question in my mind. The donor might think they can do some of it, but it's going to be that busboy or waiter, whoever's there, who's going to be cleaning up. And then they're going to be going into the kitchen and they're going to be making a salad and preparing other foods. Most of the foodborne illness we have in the U.S. is associated with uncleanly hands and not washing your hands frequently enough. So do you want to increase that risk and risk foodborne illness? Foodborne illness is widespread. I mean, there are lots of restaurants. Salmonella, for example, is very common. People associate with huli chicken and so forth, but it's associated with lots of foods and dogs. And do you want to have that increased risk or try to avoid it? So I'm thinking what we're trying to do is find that sweet spot where, we can to some extent accommodate some of the dog owners, but we don't want to put others at risk. It's honestly not the dog owner that you're really worried about. As Robert said, are often at home and the dog's licking him in the face. And I haven't had dogs take meat out of my mouth, but I've done things just as bad. But that's up to the owner. But when you're in a restaurant, you would expect to have a different standard that applies. And you certainly wouldn't want to have the person eating next to you accept or even think that they're going to accept the same things you do as being acceptable. So I think you're going to need to find that sweet spot. Again, our position is very clearly we don't want dogs in restaurants, that is indoors. But if the area can be closed off and secured, say there's a swinging door between the food prep and service areas and the outside eating areas, there may be some opportunity there to identify conditions under which dogs could be present without increasing the risks substantially. So I think there is something in between what this bill calls for and what I think we would be comfortable with at the health department, but we're not there yet.
On the bill and on some of the issues that we were talking about, the bowl of water and whatnot, I did not see it laid out in the legislation as to whether or not the dog is allowed to eat in the restaurant. What is the position there?
Yeah, the legislation doesn't address that. I don't know if Department of Health would be interested in creating rules around that, or if that would be left to the restaurant to decide. But that wasn't, our main focus was on making sure that families could be together. That if you want to go out to eat with your animal companion, with your dog, you can do that. And whether the dog gets fed or not at the time, I don't think is as an important part of that question. It's really about being able to be together.
I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
go ahead.
I would like to add to that. I hate to keep referring to, I won't refer to California, I'll say other states. No eating in the restaurant by the dog. Drinking of water in a separate cup, paper cup or something allowed. If I read the bill right in California, the area defined for patrons with dogs cannot have preset tables or any storage of bowls, plates, glasses, or silverware.
Well, that's not the bill that we have. So how would
no.
you feel as the business owner?
No,
if
I
you
mean,
saw
I'm saying that as a restaurant owner, I'm willing to make exceptions. And my exceptions, I'm learning from what these other states are doing, not necessarily trying to copy anybody, but an outside area that took all the precautions would be a compromise to help, and I'll say us, dog-friendly people who would like to take our dogs to a meal for lunch or dinner with us. But I'm totally opposed, as I know the restaurant business for 25 years, I'm totally opposed to bringing a dog into that setting that I know is there to serve human beings, patrons.
So on the other end of the spectrum, and Nevada actually doesn't have a statewide pet-friendly dining law, but it allows the counties their own discretion, and in the county that represents Las Vegas, it is dog-friendly, and they have restaurants with menus for the dogs. So you can order off of the human menu and order for your dog off of the dog menu. So it does, there's quite a spectrum across the country.
And I could see actually a restaurant, if you wanted to fill that niche, doing quite a good business if you were the only one that had a dog menu. A lot of calls are coming in about what this could be potentially a slippery slope. The caller does not want dogs, saying dogs today, what pets tomorrow? We should not be expected to like their families as dogs have become. And this person saying, well, why can't cats or other animals be welcomed into restaurants as well? Is that the next step?
Yeah, let me speak to that, because actually the original proposal actually covered pets and cats. Let's talk about for a second. Cats carry toxoplasmosis, which is not a commonly reported illness, but our surveys show that a large percentage of us have been exposed. It's a particular concern to people who are immunocompromised, people with HIV infection, who don't have good immune systems, and this disease can be serious and fatal for those people, and only cats transmit it. But every cat transmits millions of cysts, and those cysts live for, talk about a risk, for months, even years under some situations, and it only takes one to infect you. It's also a risk for pregnant women, not for the women themselves, but for their babies. It affects the developing fetus. So you don't want to be around cats if you're pregnant. And of course, if you have a HIV infection or something like that. So cats would completely be off the table in our view. Dogs are not as much of a threat from that standpoint. There are some deadly diseases they carry, but they're very rare, and it's usually associated with exposure to urine and water and so forth that would be of concern. But it's the common diseases that you might take for granted. Campylobacter, the bacteria that commonly causes food poisoning. Dogs are frequent carriers of that. So there are some animals that are more of concern than others. Cats would be of much more concern than dogs would be. Birds, and there are other animals that now are prohibited from being inside of restaurants that could potentially transmit disease. I think this bill is focused on dogs because there's an interest in dogs, and of all the dogs out there, animals out there, dogs are probably of less risk from a human health standpoint than many other animals. Not to say it's benign, but it's something I think people would, as we talked about outdoor eating areas, be more tolerant of.
And as we're sort of working on moving toward being a more pet-friendly community, and changing those attitudes, dogs are particularly social animals, and so it's of even more benefit for a dog to really be integrated as part of its family. And we want to move away from a society where dogs are chained in the garage or, or act as furry alarm systems, and to a society where our dogs really are integrated into our families, because they're very social animals, and it's very important for them, if they're going to be healthy and happy, to have that strong relationship.
The questions that are coming in are so interesting to me, and they bring up issues that I had not even considered. Does a dog count the same as a person in terms of maximum occupancy? Seems like a fire code risk as well. I mean, if you have a restaurant full of dogs, how does that work?
I'm not going to have a restaurant full of dogs. It's not going to happen. and possibly the outside patio that I might have in my next restaurant, that could be a consideration. But I think that's a great question. But if we had 6 dogs, had 6 less people that could eat there? No, they can't sit on chairs. They can't sit in booths. So the answer is no.
Okay. Michelle wants to know, fleas and ticks, the cost of prevention is very high. Many people won't spend the money to use the products. Also, biting is inevitable when food is around. I'm sure that you've done the research.
Biting of the food?
I would think that she means biting of the
fleas.
People.
Oh.
Interesting.
Or maybe fleas and ticks. I mean, is that a concern at all?
It's a public health concern. Of course it is. Fleas and ticks can carry disease too, and just the tick bite often gets infected. So, and lots of dogs here don't have fleas or ticks. Many of them do have. They're treated, and some of the powders and things are actually a problem. If you patted a dog, some people would react to that adversely. It's one of the issues that I think needs to be considered as we look at the issue.
Sandy, Yuki in Mo'iliili says, would any type of dog be allowed? Pit bulls? I mean, I know you folks are supporting this legislation. Would you have any restrictions on the kind of animal or the kind of dog that could come in?
That is a good question, and I would have to defer that to our general manager, because he would be the one that would set the policy for our business. So I can't really answer that confidently at this point. We would have to wait for the legislation to go through for us to create some type of policy and then implement it in order for me to answer that.
I mean, I do wonder that certain dog owners might feel discriminated against. My breed is not allowed in, and
how would the manager be able to determine what dog would be, a breed of dog would be acceptable? I've met very nice pit bulls. I've also met really vicious golden retrievers. So
Mean chihuahuas.
Yeah, I would
and
think
chihuahuas.
that you
They could carry IDs.
A lot of the
I don't see
restaurants
that being
we've
a viable
spoken to
option.
around the country that have, where this is illegal to have a pet-friendly policy, their basic guideline to their staff is, if the dog seems like it's calm and well-behaved, don't worry. If the dog seems like it's not calm and well-behaved, well, you have the authority
pretty much,
to tell that person not to come into your restaurant. So, I think behavior is probably more of an issue than breed or size or anything.
Do you have that kind of personnel that can determine at the door? Now they have to study the personality of the dog. I have enough problems with people.
Well, it seems to be working, because the restaurants we're talking to don't report incidences of dogs getting out of control. So the policy seems to be effective.
But
Yeah, I mean, if you have a
remember, there are
dog
no
jumping
dogs allowed in
around and
restaurants now,
hopping.
so there are very few dogs.
Very
When that number goes up by 100 or whatever it
Yeah.
does, you're going to find a lot more dogs coming in restaurants that are potentially problematic, just by the
Yeah, it's
sheer
just that we
nature
haven't
of
seen
numbers,
that
yeah.
in other places.
But like Bruce said, if the law is passed and you see a lot more dogs, you're going to see more offended people, and they're not going to come back to your restaurant, even though we're going to make some of them happy. That's
But
why
again, it's a choice for those
It's a
restaurants.
choice,
if they don't
but the-
want those
but the
dogs
an-
in
the
there, they
answer
don't
is-
have to be in there.
the
And if their
answer-
clientele don't want the dogs in there, they're going to tell the owners, and they're going to listen. And so they have that freedom.
well, and to that point, someone writing in saying, shouldn't it just be up to the customer to decide whether or not they want to eat in a dog-friendly restaurant?
Yes.
What about that point?
Well, I would probably avoid a restaurant personally if there were lots of dogs in there, because I wouldn't want to be eating with a lot of other strangers' dogs. But having said that, yeah, you could always choose to not go to the restaurant. But
Would you worry about losing business either way then?
it goes down to the hypothetical. If I had a restaurant with outside seating, I would make all the exceptions.
You've got a very specific,
Yeah, but
as is, do you think that you would adopt
No,
this?
in my restaurant without outside seating, there's no way I could could even see this happening because customers would be offended. And even though a few would be happy, and I'm a dog lover, I'm trying to make it work for everybody, but you know.
Well, you've got this ideal property in mind with a separate
Yeah,
entity.
I don't own it. I don't own it, but I'm looking at the laws of the 9 states that have made the exceptions to step aside a little bit and say, okay, we still know it's a health concern, we still know it's a bite and fight concern, so we've come up with if you have an outside area, and it's tough for us here in Hawaii, especially in Waikiki, I mean, rent is expensive, and to have an outside area. But if you have one, it's ideal. If you don't have one, I don't think it's a great idea.
We'd love to see look at the law in California, for example, more carefully and see if we could adopt some of that. You know, you haven't spoken about it, but one of the concerns we have is with doing this by legislation. That's not a forum that necessarily lends itself well to really good discussion.
No.
You know, we've talked about a dozen issues already tonight, and I would hope that we would be able to seriously consider all of those issues. And through rulemaking, statewide hearings and informational meetings and so forth, we'd be gathering information that I think would be very important in considering whether or not we want to go with this. And again, unfortunately with legislation, typically the legislature gives you authority to do something, and then it leaves it to the departments to figure out how to make it work. And that's probably the way this should go, as there are lots of very complicated issues here. We do have the authority to prohibit or allow dogs as it is now. We don't need legislation to make rules that would allow this to happen. What we need is good information on what works and what doesn't work, and to craft through a very deliberate and open process regulations that I think would be appropriate, given all the concerns that are raised.
Well, we have dozens of calls and comments, and I know we're approaching the end of the hour. We do want to let you know that tomorrow, if you want to weigh in on this at the legislature, we have a graphic that can tell you about this. The Agriculture Committee is having a public hearing, 8:30 in the morning. It's the first item on the agenda in the conference room 312 at the state capitol. I expect that there will be a number of people there. And as we are approaching the end, Stephanie, I do want to circle back to you. And again, you know, we've heard all these issues. What do you think of Bruce's idea that this goes not through the legislature, but through rulemaking? That might not happen very quickly, I would think.
Rulemaking is not a quick process, no. We recently got through a 4-year process of trying to ban the import of dangerous wild animals for circus and fairs, so it's not speedy. But, you know, Hawaiian Humane Society is playing the long game. You know, we are in this, we're committed to this issue, we're committed to creating more pet-friendly community, pet-friendly housing, pet-friendly public and commercial spaces, pet-friendly workspaces. So we will work with the department at their invitation, but we do think that this legislation could be a good first step. There will probably still need to be rules implemented if the bill passes. So we're happy to work with all stakeholders in order to create a more pet-friendly, more compassionate community so that we have the ability to take better care of our animals and to have our animals be the family members that we think of them as.
Okay. Robert, I want to go back to you. There's still questions coming in, and we love it. What is the limit? Can customers bring multiple dogs in? I mean, we've talked about so many issues raised here tonight. If the law passes as is, do you see adopting it in your future?
If the law passes as is, no, I would not, because I believe there'd be too many issues. And you talk about multiple dogs. What about multiple customers? I see 200 people. What if I find out I have 180 adults humans, and 26 dogs? You know, what do I have to do with my staff? They all have to be instructed, run around with the sanitizer. I mean, things are going to happen. It's a numbers game. Things are going to happen. There are going to be dog attacks. There are going to be people, because there are going to be people that aren't as smart as their dogs putting the food on the floor for them to eat. There are going to be dogs that urinate. I'm not going to accept that in my restaurants, but would if I had, you know, I don't want to go there again.
This idyllic property, I know, this dream.
But if I do have outside seating at the Hilton Hawaiian Village in 2 of my restaurants. If the hotel was dog friendly, I would that would be fine for me.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I want to hear from both of you. Sandy, do you still think that this is a good idea?
Absolutely. This is about freedom of choice and developing a more family-friendly environment, a culture in a society that's more accepting.
Okay, and Bruce, I want to give you the last word.
I think the law is too permissive as it is now, and I think we need a much more deliberate and open process to come up with a solution. Times are changing. People are, I think, much more accepting of dogs and other animals. But I think this bill is far from a point where it can be passed, and I would much prefer this discussion continue. All the good comments we've gotten tonight be considered in a much more deliberate way, so that we can come up with something that's much more palatable to everyone. I think there's a win-win here. I just think we need to find it, and this bill is not that. It's gotten the discussion going, and I applaud the Humane Society for going there. But I think we have a lot of work to do before we come up with something that's going to be palatable to the restaurant industry and to their customers.
Okay, and we know so many of you are passionate about this. So again, tomorrow morning at 8:30 at the Agriculture Committee, there will be a public hearing. That's in Conference Room 312 at the State Capitol. It's your chance to weigh in, and if you didn't get a chance to do so tonight, to the lawmakers who will be voting on this and making this decision. Mahalo to all of you for joining us tonight. We, of course, thank our guests, Stephanie Kendrick, Public Policy Advocate for the Hawaiian Humane Society, Sandy Livingston, Marketing Director for Hula's Bar and Lay Stand, Bruce Anderson, the Director of the Hawaii State Department of Health, and Robert Bach, owner of Giovanni Pastrami, CJ's New York Style Deli, and Round Table Pizza in Waikiki. Next week on Insights, plastic waste. Just how big of a problem is it, and what can we do about it? I'm Yunji Denise for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Ahui ho.